Let's take another look at FSR3. Now, I've already looked at this on a variety of GPUs, including AMD's flagship 7900 XTX, all the way down to the technically unsupported GTX 1060. However, in this video, we're going to take a look at integrated GPUs and how well do they do using FSR3. And I first tried this out on my Steam Deck with limited success. So, no success. Basically, FSR3 is currently only available in 2 games. You have Immortals of Aveum and Forspoken, and neither of them could get up and running on Steam Deck, at least in Steam OS. With Immortals of Aveum, the second I turned on FSR3 Frame Generation, it just crashed. Now, the Upscaler would work, but that's not really what we're looking at here. We want to look at Frame Generation. And so at that point I was like, okay, there's probably some kind of incompatibility with the Linux operating system going on here. So the other integrated GPU I have available for testing is in here. This is the GTR 7 Pro from Vsync that I've reviewed a bit on the channel. And inside of this is an RDNA 3 based APU. This has a RX 780M integrated graphics inside of it. On a pretty powerful CPU as well as the 7940HS system. So this being running Windows and on the latest Windows drivers and all of that, I'm a little more hopeful. So let's go ahead and plug this thing in and see what happens. And we'll kind of go on a little adventure today, seeing if we get anything out of this. All right, I'm going to be using my method of filming the screen with 120 FPS camera to capture the experience because, I mean, on YouTube, you can never actually show what the experience is like. But some of the issues with FSR3 can sometimes be frame pacing issues, things like that. Also, whether or not FreeSync is correctly kicking in. We can see right now there's no FSR3 enabled. FreeSync is running as it should be in low frame rate compensation mode. So my TV is, adjusting to the frame rate outputs. And I've seen some issues with that when we try to enable FSR3. Now, we're currently in Forspoken, which is one of the 2 games that offers FSR3 Frame Generation at this point in time. And we're basically at the low preset, and currently FSR3 is completely turned off. And it looks like at these settings, and it is 1080p resolution, we are down in the 20s. So not particularly playable, although for a little integrated graphics chip, it's putting up a pretty good fight. Let's go ahead and adjust these settings and just see what sort of an experience we get. First, let's kick on the upscaling. So upscaling at the quality setting will be an internal render resolution of 720p. And sure, on a massive screen like this, it isn't going to look great. But if you were playing this on a smaller screen, or if this was inside of a little mobile gaming device, I think this would look a lot more reasonable. Looks like if I kick on the frame rate counters, we do dip below 30 at times, but it is around a 30 FPS average at these settings. Now, if I go ahead and pan the camera and such, at 30 frames per second, you get a lot of chop between frames. And this is the kind of thing that frame generation is designed to kind of smooth out. That being said, it works best when you have a base frame rate of around 60 frames per second. We're only around 30 here, but let's go ahead and kick it on and then play around with the other more aggressive settings. So FSR3 Frame Generation on. Let's go ahead and see whoa. Okay, it's looking like it's actually broken. This isn't just, I think that we're running at a low frame rate. Again, I'm hoping this is picking up in the camera, but if the camera moves at all, do you guys see it's weirdly jumpy and shimmery. This is not at all what this has looked like on any other graphics card that I have tested out. So yeah, it's looking like it is not properly implemented here, which is I'm not properly working on this integrated GPU. To give it its best shot possible, let's go ahead and give it a higher base frame rate. So let's kick the FSR3 upscaling to performance mode, which is giving it now a higher base frame rate to work with. So again, here's a normal camera pan with no frame generation enabled. You know, things look extremely pixelated due to the low internal resolution, but you know, playing on a controller and with reasonable expectations for the device that we're playing on, I mean, this is not an unplayable frame rate, but let's see what frame generation can do for us. Will it work better with the higher base frame rate? Okay, it's looking like it's pushing our frame rate over 60. However, are the frames actually worth... Whoa. No, something is just wrong here. It's jumpy and weirdly shimmery. Yeah, something just is not working properly on this. Okay, I'm hoping that maybe this will work better in our other game we have to try it out on, Immortals of Aveum. I'll also play around with this a bit off camera, and if I get anything working... for example, this seems to be jumping up to the wrong frame rate there. Anyway, I'll play around with this a bit off camera, and if I get anything working better, I'll show you guys. But if not, I'll see you in Immortals of Aveum and hope for a better result. All right, we've now loaded up Immortals of Aveum. Hopefully we have something a little better to report. We're currently under 30 frames per second in this game. Overall graphics settings, I've just slid everything to low or off. So we're giving the integrated GPU every chance it has at running this Unreal Engine 5 game. And yeah, it's gonna be it's gonna be a little bit difficult. But hey, here we are. So we're currently in the 20s, which is not amazing. But let's go ahead and kick on some FSR upscaling and see what that can get us, maybe over 30 at least. So let's try FSR quality upscaling. So no frame generation yet at this point. And it looks like we are actually, wow, taking quite a performance boost up to 42, looking out over this direction. Actually looks like we're maintaining over 30. So we now have, you know, I'm on a controller here because I figured if, you know, especially if frame gen adds latency and we're at low frame rates, I've always found a controller is much more tolerable than than trying to play with a mouse. So giving it every chance we can get. All right, let's go ahead and kick on frame generation. And the main thing I'm hoping for is that it just actually works regardless of usability compared to what we saw in Forspoken. So frame generation kicking on. Okay, frame rate number is now reporting over 60, but let's check the camp. Okay. All right, the frame pacing is kind of choppy right now. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it jumps a little bit. It's not super smooth. However, the frames don't look the weird mess that we got in Forspoken. So I've got to say that this is off to a much better showing than what we saw in Forspoken. So frame pacing wise, the biggest thing I noticed when testing out other GPUs with FSR3 is that it's best when you can Vsync lock to your monitor's max refresh rate. And then the pacing is significantly improved. So I do have Vsync enabled, which is currently the recommended option, but we're on a 120 Hz display. So we're going to try a couple of things. First, leaving it on the 120 Hz display, we're going to kick on FSR3 upscaling more aggressively to get a higher base frame rate. And if that doesn't smooth things out, we'll try setting the monitor to 60 Hz and see what that does. So I just turned off frame generation and I'm turning on FSR3 performance mode upscaling. So this is no frame generation. This is just performance mode upscaling, which on a 1080p output is a 540p internal resolution, which does get quite pixelated, especially in motion. Now this is giving us a base frame rate here into the 40s and 50s, at least in this area, which is something. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we then kick on the frame generation on top of that. So it doesn't quite double because there's a performance cost of doing the generated frames. So really what it does is it cuts your base frame rate because of the additional performance cost and then doubles it from there. Looks like we're hitting into the 70s, into the 60s when I'm looking this way and kind of in motion. Let me give it a camera pan. Still feels a little bit juddery on the camera pan. So considering the fact that we are now staying over 60 frames per second, I'm actually thinking I'm going to kill the game, lock my monitor to 60 hertz, and then pop it back in. So I'll edit that in for you in just a second. All right, I've restarted the game with the monitor now set to a 60 hertz mode. Now, right now this is frame generation off, just to get us another look at, okay, so if I don't enable frame generation, I'm here in the 40s, 50s at times. And that's kind of what the camera pans look like. There can be some stutter to them. And there's not, there is, there's gaps between frames, if that kind of makes sense. Now let's go ahead and see if frame generation does anything for us. Again, frame generation aren't responsive frames, so the only reason you would ever want to enable these is if it smooths out motion on your screen, if it's going to make things feel, well, at least look smoother to your eye, right? So I'm hoping that now that we're going to be locking to 60, that we might actually be getting that. So I'm going to now do my smooth camera pan, and actually, that seems paced extremely well. That looks buttery smooth. Interesting. Now, granted, our internal resolution is in performance mode, so this looks extremely pixelated, especially on this large of a display. But that aside, if we're just testing, is frame generation working, compared to Forspoken, where we had just awful weirdness that I couldn't fix off camera either. We just had awful weirdness with it, and here it's looking like, yeah, Vsync locking to 60 hertz has at least sort of, I mean, it does look smooth now. Now, responsiveness-wise, I think on a mouse, generating frames from 30 to 60 when I switch to mouse movement, this doesn't feel super responsive. I don't really like it on a mouse. This is really not the frame rates you'd want to be using frame generation on. And I will say that on a controller, I don't know, I guess because a joystick is less of a one-to-one response than moving a mouse is, I just feel like I can tolerate it a little bit better. I feel like the UI elements are only updating at 30 though. I think that's how they avoid the ghosting issues, is that they run at the native thing. So that looks a little bit bad in motion. But I think in general, if we're just trying to confirm, okay, is FSR3 Frame Generation working on these types of devices? I think that's just an Unreal Engine traversal stutter that we saw there. I think at least in this game, it does seem to be working. So in Forspoken, no. In Immortals of Aveum, yes, although not on Steam Deck in Linux. So as far as all the IGP testing that we can do right now goes, I think it looks like it's interesting. Unreal Engine 5 is now running at a locked 60 frames per second. Granted, it's not as responsive as a real 60 frames per second, but it does seem to actually be working, which is nice. And I think the bigger deal here is hopefully we get more games, and if there are games that are less demanding, to where you could actually run them at a native, if you could actually run them over 60 FPS on the iGPU, and then you could generate frames from there and hit a 120. If you're on something like maybe an ROG Ally or something like that, which has a 120 hertz screen, because again, I think this technology is really at its best when it's going from 60 to 120, not when it's just trying to lock you to 60. However, the frame pacing here does look pretty good. So like, it's kind of doing its job. And on a slow-paced game on a controller, I think it is, helping the visual smoothness. Again, I could try turning it off once again, and there's really no way to accurately show the smoothness on a locked YouTube video. But again, with it off, it's a similar experience. We're not that far below 60, but like, it did feel like a more, I don't know, locked 60 camera pan. But the game does feel more responsive, I think, running at the actual 50 than running at the frame-generated 60. So like I said, I think this is more of a, not that I would necessarily use it like this. I really don't think it's best suited for generating frames up to 60, but this video is more about just a proof of concept. Does this work at all on these integrated GPUs? And I think the answer is it seems like at least yes in at least this one game. And can we get it to you know, into more games. That's the main thing. I think there could definitely be games where this would be a feature you might want to use, especially if you're trying to max out ROG allies like 120 hertz screen, something like that. Now, I don't have an ROG ally to test on. Kicked frame generation back on here for the cutscene. All right, guys, I may or may not have time to do any side-by-side editing after this, or I might just upload the video the way it is now. But hopefully you guys found this useful, and I hope everyone has an excellent day.